taking you on a tour of Scotland.
We're traveling today from Edinburgh north to Inverness in the heart of the Scottish Highlands. It takes about 3.5 hours by train as we leave the suburbs of Edinburgh. You see the typical row houses, very efficient use of the land, enables them to keep a lot of open space in Scotland. In fact, 98% of Scotland, they say, is open spaces, as you can see here. Beautiful green rolling hills, lots of streams, lots of boglands and lakes and rivers and waterfalls. And the Brit Rail system makes it a very convenient trip to go from Edinburgh north to Inverness. It just takes about 3.5 hours, speeding along about 100 miles an hour, and you pass through quite a few of these small villages and communities along the way. Here we see the village of Pitlochry, and we'll also be passing through Newtonmore and Avermore, Carbridge, and then finally arriving at Inverness. The train just makes about 5 stops along the way, but it's a direct train. You don't have to get off. You can just sit back and relax if you wish, maybe even catch up on a nap while you're traveling, or better yet, enjoy the beautiful scenic vistas outside the window. For quite a bit of the ways, you'll see water either in the form of the ocean or streams or ponds or lakes. The farmers rolling up their hay, and here you'll see the map that shows you the route that we're taking from Edinburgh north to Inverness. This program is part of a video tour of the British Isles that we're presenting with the Hawaii Geographic Society's World Traveler. We hope you've been tuned in recent weeks. We've already taken you to Edinburgh, a tour of that great cultural capital of Scotland. And before that, we enjoyed a visit to the Lake District in Yorkshire. And coming up in future programs, we'll be flying over to Ireland, and then we'll be seeing a little bit more of Great Britain down south in the town of Bath. But for now, we've arrived in Inverness, the capital of the Scottish Highlands. For now, we're just driving through town, eager to get out into the natural countryside and enjoy the beauties of the rolling hills and valleys of the Highlands. But we shall return to Inverness later in the program and have a walk around, look at the shopping malls and a few of the historic buildings. Crossing the River Ness that flows right through the middle of town, we gain an impressive view of Inverness Castle on the other side. This castle looks like it's very ancient, but actually dates to the early 19th century. It was rebuilt from an earlier castle that was blown up during the 18th century. You'll notice several beautiful footbridges across the River Ness, some of which connect up with islands in the middle of the stream and form a beautiful public park. Continuing our drive along the River Ness, which becomes the Caledonian Canal. This is one of the great feats of engineering of the early 19th century. The canal is about 60 miles long. Most of it is natural lakes and streams. About 20 of the miles were actually excavated as a canal, and this enabled boats to pass from one side of Scotland to the other without going around the rugged northern headlands. We arrive at the centerpiece of the Highlands, Loch Ness. This is the largest lake in England. But of course, that's not the reason why it's famous. We've all heard of Nessie, the monster who lurks within. And here's your chance to find if it's real. Was that an apparition? Did we see the monster? Yes, we did see the monster. And one of the best places to try and spot that sea serpent is Cawdor Castle, here near Drumnadrochit. This fortress was blown up several hundred years ago, for it has occupied a strategic and much contested position here in the midst of the Great Glen. And all around this region you'll find stone bridges and various ruins and spectacular scenery such as this. The hills get rugged in the Highlands. This is not your Great Britain of the pretty cozy little villages and the little pansy gardens and the charming little manicured lawns. This is raw nature at its finest, at its most majestic. In our tour, we're driving all the way from the eastern coast of the Highlands to the western coast.
We're standing in the beautiful hills of the Highlands of Scotland. Behind me is Loch Garry, and all around us the region is Glengarry. And then beyond in the far distance, there's the hills of Knoydart. And this is one of the most remote regions of Scotland. The people who live in the far hills have to get there by boat. There's not even any roads that go there. And it's just a beautiful region, the beautiful Loch Garry behind us. It's often said that the shape of Loch Garry resembles the shape of Scotland itself, which is another reason why this area is so scenic and so popular with the visitors.
From scenic Glengarry, we swing back around towards Loch Ness, which is always the center of attraction in this region. As we approach the head of the lake, which is the southernmost end of Loch Ness, we come upon the small village of Fort Augustus with a population of about 1,000, but it's famous for the locks that connect Loch Ness with the continuation of the Caledonian Canal. And it's quite fascinating to just stand for a while and watch the lock in operation as the boats are lifted from one level to the next to the next. The Caledonian Canal bisects Scotland through the Great Glen, and it runs through the loftiest sections of Scotland. As we've said, travels for about 60 miles. It was constructed between 1803 and 1822, and it was quite important for a brief while before the railroads came into being, and then later larger ships, which could sail around the north of Scotland, made the Caledonian Canal largely unnecessary, but it's still very popular with boaters. We now pay a visit to Cawdor Castle, located just a few miles south of Inverness in the village of Nairn. This is a late 14th century tower house expanded into a stately home that's still occupied today by the same family that's lived here for hundreds of years. It's rich in legends of Macbeth, and it's rich in these beautiful gardens that surround it. The flower gardens of Cawdor by themselves are attraction enough to visit this area. And as we stroll through these splendid gardens, it's interesting to reflect upon the rugged history that spawned construction of so many interesting castles scattered throughout the Scottish landscape. Scotland's been occupied for thousands of years, and religion and warfare has always played a role in the history of this land. From as early as the last ice age, mankind has lived in Scotland, as attested by the stone ruins, some of which we'll see later in the program. Eventually the Celts moved in, perhaps from Ireland, perhaps from Wales, and they are even today closely related to the people of Ireland and Wales in language and in tradition. These people were called the Picts by the early Roman invaders who came in during the early 1st century, but didn't have much of an interest in fighting against these wild and rugged residents of what they called Caledonia. So the Romans retreated to Hadrian's Wall and left the Picts alone to develop in peace. Around AD 500, a different breed of Celt came over, perhaps from Ireland, and brought with them Christianity. These early historic centuries were marked by the strong leadership of the church, by the monks and the abbots, but by the time of the Reformation with John Knox and his militant Calvinism, this took over in many areas, and Presbyterianism is still the major religion in Scotland, despite their strong link with England. Alongside the flower gardens of Cawdor Castle, you can enjoy a walk into the forest, into more of a primeval landscape setting, and then back into the flower gardens as we make our rounds and stroll about, getting ready to enter this beautiful castle. Castles were built throughout the medieval period of Scotland from about the year 1000 right up through 1600, for warfare was endemic between the clans during this time. It didn't consist of a country as much as a series of feudal fiefs and villages. Sometimes the feudal Scots would band together to fight the English, or to fight the invading Vikings, or to band together and fight each other. Thus you'll find all these castles, and Cawdor is one of the most magnificent. It features all of those medieval architectural elements that you'd look for in a classic castle with the central keep. There's a drawbridge. There's a moat around the castle, which is dry today, but which was formerly important to the defenses. And you know that battles were fought here over this territory. Shakespeare's Macbeth was Thane of Cawdor, but the sense of history that exists within these turreted walls is much more than fictional. And this is a lived-in castle, not an abandoned and decadent relic that's been forgotten. The family still occupies, and many of the rooms, as you see here, are open to the public, as is the kitchen, the sitting rooms. There's tapestries on the wall and oil paintings and fine furniture inside, all of which add up to make a wonderful experience with the gardens, the surrounding landscape, and the beautiful scenic countryside about Cawdor Castle. The many castles of Scotland are living testament to the rich history of this proud land. As Scotland emerged from the Middle Ages, political stability increased, and the line of the Stuarts ruled the country for nearly 300 years, from 1371 to 1649. There's always been some tension between Scotland and England. Of course, now the two lands are united as one nation called Great Britain, also called the United Kingdom. But historically, they were two separate countries, the Kingdom of Scotland and the Kingdom of England. And just as we're now reaching the end of the road in our scenic drive, so too Scotland reached the end of their road of independence in 1707 when they became united with England. Not altogether voluntarily so. And even today, the Scots maintain a feeling of freedom and independence, just as these beautiful horses are free to roam through the countryside. This is the national attitude of the Scots. It even reaches an extreme in a political viewpoint of devolution, which would like to see Scotland independent once again from England. This is a feeling held by quite a few Scottish people, but in general, we can certainly say that Scotland and England live in harmony today, and they get along just fine. Perhaps the closest bond in the early days occurred when King James I took the throne in 1603, after the death of Elizabeth, for he was the first Scottish king to rule over both England and Scotland. Yet another castle reminds us of more battles that took place between England and Scotland. Here we're looking at the most picturesque, probably the most famous of all Scottish castles, Eilean Donan. This appears in more posters and postcards and books and magazines and ads than you'll find any other castle. It's got this great silhouette, massive walls, and it stands on a little rocky island at the confluence of three lakes, a perfect setting for a grand castle. Eilean Donan Castle, and it's still occupied today by the family who has refurbished it. It was blown to smithereens back in 1719 when the Spanish showed up to help the native Scots in a rebellion against the British. Another Jacobite revolution, but it has since then been rebuilt and brought into this beautiful state of preservation that you see here today. There's a lot of Mackenzie and McRae relics inside the castle. The family room, there's furniture dating from 300 and 400 years ago, and different Scottish coats of arms. Makes a great public display. A passing shower adds an appropriately gloomy touch to this brooding castle that stands guarding the point. It was originally built in the year 1220 to deter Viking penetration. The landscape of Scotland has undergone cataclysmic upheavals during its geological history. Originally part of the continental landmass, it suffered from earthquakes and typhoons and extremes of temperature, formation and disappearance of deserts and volcanoes, scouring effect of glaciers, all of which have carved out this rugged beauty that we can enjoy today.
This is the River Morriston. It's just going to join Loch Ness, about 400 metres further on. At the moment it's quite low, but sometimes it's flooding so high that there's no waterfall here at all, it's just level. and it can go. I've seen it go across the side of the old bridge.
Aye. Any idea how old the bridge is?
Yes, it was opened in 1830, approximately. I can't just remember that. In 1830, and it was built as the beginning of the communication system in the Highlands.
The settlers of Scotland have used stone as a building material for many thousands of years, probably because it's so abundant in the hillsides and in the farmlands. It's very rocky terrain here, and as a result, the earliest farmers, the Neolithic farmers from 5,000 years ago, built stone structures, some of which still stand today. We've arrived at one of the best preserved of all the Neolithic burial sites of Scotland, just 6 miles east of the town of Inverness, the Balnearin of Cawdor.
I'm standing on another megalithic stone monument. This one is a stone ring, and on the inside there's a stone opening where cremated human bones were deposited in the very ancient days. This too is about 5,000 years old, and there's curious upright stones in a circle all around it, and it's truly a magnificent megalithic stone monument, again representing a very high form of human culture. I'm standing next to one of the largest of the upright stones in this particular monumental area, and it's a beautiful stone. It's undoubtedly about 5 feet buried into the ground to give it the stability that's allowed it to stand up for perhaps 5,000 years. These are Druid monuments. Nobody is quite sure exactly when they were built or who built them, or even for exactly what purpose you have these stone circles, but it's most likely they're Druid 5,000 years ago, and they're obviously for some important ceremonial purpose. Probably religious in nature, connected with burials, connected with afterlife and spirits, journey to the heavens. Stonehenge is the most famous example of the stone circles, but it's far from the only example. It's the biggest of the stone circles in England. Certainly it's in Salisbury in the south of England, but you find the Druid stone circles all over England and Scotland and Ireland, and this site here outside of Inverness is one of the finest examples of the megalithic burials and the stone circles that go right around each of the megalithic tombs. Amazing sight.
As we walk into this stone monument, you can see why it's called a passage grave. The burial site would be in the center, and the passage was so that future burials could be added without disrupting the entire stone structure. Originally, it would have been roofed with stone corbelled arches and perhaps a dirt mound to protect it. These burial mounds were undoubtedly used and reused over a number of generations, for multiple burials have been found inside. One of the upright stones has some small cup marks. The walls of this cairn rise to 7 feet, and the other large cairn rises 9 feet above the current ground surface. And they would have certainly been higher yet during the prehistoric times when they were in use. The Balnearin of Cawdor, one of the finest examples of the Neolithic passage burial mound. These massive structures mark the cultural evolution from that of the hunter-gatherer nomadic way of life to the more settled way of farming, for only a settled existence would allow construction of such large structures. We're now going to pay a visit to a modern farming family, some friends of ours, Margaret and Martin, and their 2 children, young Martin and Sandra. Give you a little insight, a little slice of life into the domestic scene here in the Highlands just outside of Inverness. So let's drop by for tea.
The population of Scotland overall is about 5 million people, mostly located in the lowlands between Edinburgh and Glasgow, which is where all the industry is. In the Highlands, what's the population there, do you know?
It's probably about 1 million in the Highlands.
And I would think nearly half of that's located in the Aberdeen direction. A lot of that's due to the oil industry, whereas in this area, people are still farming. So we have up here about 22,000 acres of ground with 13 people on it.
Loch Ness is about 24 miles long and 1 mile wide. Not quite sure how deep it is, do you know?
I think the deepest part is almost 900 feet, but at the moment they're doing a very extensive survey to see if they can find out just the exact depth of it. But there's more water in Loch Ness than there is in all the lakes in England and Wales put together. Of course, there's a famous legend in Loch Ness of the Loch Ness Monster, that many reported sightings, but still no firm evidence one way or the other. But it makes it one of Scotland's major tourist attractions. Virtually everybody who comes to Scotland comes to Loch Ness and goes round the shores of Loch Ness.
Hoping to see the monster.
Hoping to see the monster.
No one ever does, though.
And so we return to the town of Inverness where we began our program. It's a pleasant small city, pedestrian shopping malls, a variety of restaurants, there's theaters here, and there's several comfortable hotels. It serves as the gateway to the Highlands. The townhouse is a neo-Gothic structure that serves as the city hall, which holds the headquarters of the government of the Highland region, which is Scotland's largest local government authority. And just nearby, you'll find the friendly information headquarters where you can pick up free magazines and maps and information about scenic highlights of the area. You can find booking accommodations to help you get a hotel room and pick up tickets for various events happening. Although it looks much older, the Inverness Castle was just built in the early 19th century, and there's several museums in town. You can also enjoy cruises on the Caledonian Canal and on Loch Ness that start here from Inverness. We'll be returning to Inverness in July of '95 as part of our tour of the British Isles that we're organizing with Hawaii Geographic Society. And we'll be spending 2 nights in Inverness, using it as a base for sightseeing in the region that you've been seeing in today's program. The Station Hotel is one of the nicest hotels in town, right in the middle of the city next to the train station. It's very British, very old country in style. Grand lobby, beautiful staircase, and it has one of the best restaurants in town as well. And it's so conveniently located because it's right next to the train station as we hop on our train and leave the Highlands behind.